Before Reggie and Francis could celebrate their first anniversary, Ronnie Kray was to execute George Cornell in the public bar of the Blind Beggar pub.
George was very cocksure of himself. He knew he could use himself. He knew he could handle himself. He wasn't frightened of no man. He was calling Ronnie a big puff and all that. And of course, the inevitable happened. Ronnie had a gun on him. Ronnie pulled his out, and I believe the words were said by Cornell. Oh, look who's here. With that, Ronnie went up to him, drew the gun out, pointed. He thought it was a joke. Pulled the trigger. That was it. He just shot him dead.
Perfectly gratuitous. Cornell had not been any threat to him. He'd insulted him about his homosexuality and stuff like that. But there was no economic threat from Cornell or the gang that he was a part of, which was the Richardsons. But when Ronnie Kray killed him, I mean, he said, "I've got my button," just as the Yanks say when they've killed someone.
Over 30 people witnessed the shooting. Not one would pick Ronnie Kray from the lineup. It seemed this outlandish act of violence had only served to strengthen their position.
We eventually traced most of the witnesses there, but none of them would give evidence that they'd seen Ronnie Kray. They were immovable because there was always this wall of silence. First of all, this natural wall of silence that people in the East End don't talk to the coppers. And the second thing was that this wall of fear.
Cornell's killing escalated a long-standing feud with the Richardsons, a rival gang from south of the river. To support them in this campaign, the firm wanted Frank Mitchell, the Mad Axe Man. In 1967, they arranged his escape from Dartmoor prison. A massive search ensued. He was hiding here, a flat in the East End of London, looked after by Albert Donahue, a trusted member of the firm. Soon afterwards, the Richardsons were imprisoned before a showdown could take place. Mitchell was still a wanted man, but not by the Krays.
If the twins got him out, and the twins are looking after him, nobody can kill him in front of the twins. There's only one people who can hurt him, and that's the twins themselves. The only thing I'll put it down to, he got too much trouble. He was a great big massive guy. I can assure you that he'd chew and eat them two, plus half of the firm for breakfast and think nothing of it. He's a great big massive guy, strong as a lion. Maybe he got out of line, they couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle him, they didn't know what to do, and the only thing they knew how is get rid of him. Couldn't put him back in prison, they couldn't just, because they would be letting themselves down in front of the firm by grassing him up. They can't say, "Come and get Mitchell, he's here." That's grassing. Them days it was never ever heard of. Nobody grassed in the underworld them days.
Frank Mitchell's body was never found. Officially, his murder remains unsolved. The story of the Krays has several victims, none sadder than Frances. Amidst the glamour, she had become increasingly disillusioned with her life and found it impossible to escape the notoriety of her husband or compete with the intensity of his relationship with a twin brother.
I think Ronnie mixed the pudding up there quite a bit, and very much the domineering factor of the two. He might have got, I don't know what he'd done to Francis, but all I know is he was constantly rowing.
In June 1967, Frances killed herself with an overdose of tablets. Reggie insisted that she be buried in her wedding dress.
It really slaughtered him, and well, for a week or two he just didn't know what he was doing, Reggie. He was wandering the days, and when she died he gave up. He had a death wish, I'm sure, in many ways.
Reggie's only escape was into the company of his brother, but by now, Ronnie's behavior offered little sanctuary. He now saw murder as a demonstration of allegiance to the firm. Reggie had yet to prove his.
McVitie was a £2-a-week bandit. He was not a villain of their calibre by any means. So he posed no threat to them. So any suggestion that he was killed in retaliation for threats that he'd offered them is just nonsense. But the story that was circulated was that this was a crime that was really motiveless. The only motive that could be ascribed to it was that Ronald Kray had said, having killed Cornell, "Well, I've done my one, Reggie, now you do yours." He thought that he'd been invited with the rest of them to a drink-up, to a party. You can imagine his surprise when Reggie Kray suddenly appeared and offered a gun to his head and pulled the trigger.
Run! Ronnie was always winding him up. "I've done mine, you go and do yours." And he more or less wound him up that day. Got him really and truly at it, and he got him in the front. I don't think Reggie would have done it, but Ronnie wound him up. Put him man to man. No way. I mean, I knew Jack very, very well. Jack was a very, very good pal of mine. Whatever he'd done or whatever he was, he didn't warrant that.
You've left us no choice, Jack!
He tried to get out of the window, but he was dragged back by the people there, and then he was held by Ronnie Kray, and by this time Reggie had been given a kitchen knife, one of those long serrated kitchen knives. He hit McVitie first of all on the jaw, and then he stabbed him a number of times until eventually the poor man fell to the floor when he pushed the knife through his throat and twisted it and pulled it out again. Well, of course, it didn't take long for McVitie to die.
Contrary to Ronnie's deranged beliefs, McVitie's killing did not prove to be an act of allegiance, quite the opposite. The gratuitous nature of their actions had begun to alarm members of the firm. The wall of silence was beginning to crumble.
You just don't go around killing your own people. You've got Cornell, you've got Mitchell. Well, Cornell was one of our own, but you don't go shooting the bloke because he called you a puff. Half the world would be dead. You can't do that. And Mitchell, look what they'd done to Mitchell. And they went and done that to Jack. Well, that to me, that was the end.
The police campaign gathered momentum, but Nipper Read was insistent that the investigation gather substantive evidence against the twins before any attempt was made to charge them with murder.
We first of all started out looking at, again, the frauds, and these really formed the basis of the investigation. And so we went on from there to investigate any other kind of crime, with the exception of murder. And this was a very positive decision that I made, because I felt that if we started to investigate murders, then the question of the witnesses' safety might be jeopardised.
The mood of the firm was very, very, very dodgy. People were not turning up at the meets anymore. They didn't want to come to the meets. They made excuses why not to be there, and the nervousness on the two twins that was showing, that they can virtually, it meant they virtually pull out a gun and shoot you in the middle of the road or in the house or wherever.
It was almost common knowledge that Ronnie Kray had shot George Cornell in The Blind Beggars. As a matter of fact, when later I started to investigate it, people in the East End said to me that the Krays did everything but take the front page of the Times to advertise the fact. I mean, this enhanced their position as gang leaders, you see.
They must have felt such immense power. You see, when they'd done their first killing with Cornell, it must have been about a year or 2 years before they nicked them. So it must have given them a very high sense of power, the untouchables. No one was safe. No one.
In 1965, the Krays had seemed invulnerable to prosecution. 3 years later, a trail of senseless killings destroyed that position. They were now so feared that even members of the firm thought it safer they be put away.
Leslie Payne was a fraudster. He didn't need violence because he could charm people, he could persuade people. And so when he realised that there was no measure by which he could control the violence of the Krays, he decided then that that was too much for him and he walked away.